Welcome back, ThoughtVolutionists. Today we embark on yet another profound journey into the heart of transformation and the resilience of the human spirit. Our guest, Josh, hails from the picturesque town of Hayle, Cornwall, where he serves as a relationship communication coach. But his story, my dear ThoughtVolutionists, is one of extraordinary depth, one that is full of newfound hope and courage during times of utter despair. Josh's path to where he stands today has been marked by trials and triumphs that defy comprehension. Raised within the confines of a Jehovah's Witness upbringing, he grappled with the shadows of suicidal thoughts, self-harm, and alcoholism during his tumultuous teenage years. Yet, amidst the darkness, he made a choice, the choice to live. A year later, fate intervened in the form of a life-altering collision with a car, a moment that brought him so very close to death's door. But in the face of a possible ending to his young life story, Josh found a renewed determination to embrace that life with every fiber of his being. Today, he stands as a beacon of hope and strength, having built an incredible life and forged meaningful relationships in the wake of complex trauma and ongoing PTSD. Honest, dependable, supportive, kind, and wise. These are the words that others use to describe him, reflecting the depth of his character and the impact he has on those around him. An impact we almost would have all missed out on. As we delve into Josh's story, we are reminded of the profound capacity of the human spirit to rise from the ashes, to find purpose in pain, and to transform adversity into a source of growth and empowerment. Join us as we unravel the layers of Josh's narrative, a compelling tale of courage, vulnerability, and the indomitable human will. In his openness and willingness to share, we find inspiration. A reminder that no matter how dire the circumstances, there's always hope and there's always a way forward. This is ThoughtVolution, where the echoes of personal narratives reverberate and the human spirit shines through. Stay with us as we embark on a journey of transformation, empowerment, and the boundless possibilities found within the human heart. Trigger warning. This episode contains discussions about suicidal thoughts, self-harm, and trauma, which may be distressing for some listeners. If you or someone you know is struggling with these challenges, please seek support from a trusted friend, a family member, or mental health professional. Additionally, if you are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of self-harm or suicide, please reach out to a helpline or emergency service immediately. You are not alone, and help is available. If you don't know where to turn for help, please reach out to us and we will try to get you in touch with the right person. Thank you. Something very, very important. Before we delve into today's episode, I want to acknowledge that the personal opinions shared by our guest Josh regarding his own experience with religion, in this case with Jehovah's Witnesses, are solely reflective of his individual journey. At ThoughtVolution, we respect people of all faiths and beliefs, and it's important to recognize that each person's spiritual journey is unique and valid. Our intention is never to offend or mock any faith group or individual beliefs. Instead, we aim to create a platform for open, respectful dialogue, empathy, and connection, regardless of one's religious background. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Hey Josh, it is so amazing to have you. I am kind of wondering, I look at your room, I know our listeners can't really see what's going on there, but I see a lot of guitars. Do you care to elaborate and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Hello. Thanks for having me. I found music to be a hugely cathartic process as a young teenager. I picked up a guitar. I learned Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan, which is a 3-chord song, very easy to play. And after that, I started writing my own songs. I didn't really bother learning anymore. I just got stuck in. I have no idea what I'm playing. Still to this day, I'm writing songs that I've got no idea what I'm playing. But I found music to be hugely cathartic as a late teenager and in my early 20s, processing a lot of the things that had happened in my childhood. And still today, music is a huge part of what I do. I'm a semi-professional musician at this stage, moving more into traditional folk music. And you can see behind me a banjo and a guitar and a ukulele. And I like to make noises on those things in various combinations.
I love that. Very, very interesting, very unique. You mentioned your childhood, and of course, we'll dive into that and get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of what you experienced in your life. One question, kind of following up on that, though, you mentioned music as something that's almost therapeutic. What are some other things you do for your own self care to ground you? And especially when old trauma kind of pops up, how do you deal with that?
Great question. For many, many, many years, riding bicycles has been a huge part of my life. One of my earliest memories was learning to ride a bike at the age of 3. And by sort of age 10, I started riding BMX bikes. I rode BMX bikes seriously for well over a decade. And cycling still now is a big part of my life. I'm really into mountain biking. I still ride BMX a bit, but I've got more into mountain biking over the past few years. I realized recently, only in the last few years, that actually it's not so relaxing at all. And so that's made me shift things a little in terms of how I approach relaxation and the things I do. I like to walk. I love to travel. I've traveled extensively and I love to explore, see new things. I love to eat nice food with my wife, Charlie, spend time with our rescue dog, Mabel. We are lucky enough to live very close to the sea and able to get in the ocean, go surfing, go snorkeling, all these sort of things.
That's awesome. Yeah, especially going for walks, that's, literal grounding right there. Can you share a pivotal moment from your childhood that you would say profoundly shaped who you are today?
I think that being raised in such an alternative system, as it were, in terms of my family and the way that we operate, by the time I was in school, I realized that I was very different to other people. And that immediately began to shape me as an individual because I felt very different and I felt very lonely. I'd say that by the time I got to secondary school, I was completely infatuated with girls and being in a relationship as I desperately sought out connection through intimate relationships, sort of behind my parents' back, and it was all very taboo. But I was desperately trying to find a romantic relationship to make up for the lack of familial relationship that I was feeling. So I fell head over heels in love with a girl aged 13. And I think that was definitely a turning point in my life and the direction that it went beyond that.
How would you describe, based on this feeling of infatuation and that longing to be with somebody, how would you describe your relationship with Charlie now? Is it different from the longing that this 13-year-old boy had, or would you say it's rather similar?
I believe that our relationship was built in a collaborative way where initially we built a very firm foundation and I had done a lot of self work before entering the relationship. I'd got really clear on who I was, what I wanted, and felt very grounded in myself. And when we approached building a relationship together, it really was that. It was a collaborative process where we spoke to each other and said, I know that I am fine alone and I will live a happy life alone, but I'd quite like to do it with you. And we kind of built from that place in agreement. Our relationship now is something that I never dreamed could be possible for me. The interconnectedness and I call it positive interdependence. Charlie's my rock. Charlie is part of the foundation of who I am now and who I am able to be in the work that I do, in the way that I serve people. She really is that grounding stone where knowing that she is in my corner and that even if it's she sat at home watching Netflix while I go out and work with young people, that connection is still there and that comfort and confidence that there's somebody in my corner is just something that I never thought I would experience, and certainly at times in my life did not think was possible for me.
You described your childhood as a time where you felt like you were different. Did you have anyone you could lean on during that time? Obviously, Charlie's your rock now, but that loneliness you describe, it seems like there was nobody who was in your corner. Is that completely accurate, or did you have friends, somebody you could confide in?
I think for the most part it is accurate. There were very few people in my world who could understand the lived experience of like what I was experiencing. In fact, there weren't any people, because the people within the world of Jehovah's Witnesses and within the congregation and the faith were not the people that I was going to be able to confide in. I wasn't able to share my struggle or my doubt or my loneliness with them, and I certainly didn't. And then my peers at school could not understand it. My teachers at school could not understand fully what it was that I was experiencing. So for a long time, I really was completely alone with it. That isn't to say that there weren't people who tried to be supportive, and certainly there were some key individuals, adult figures, as I reached kind of my mid-teens and leaving school, who really were huge supports for me. But the lived experience of loneliness had become so great that although I could feel them trying to reach in, it was almost as if I couldn't open the door and didn't have the strength to allow that, like the fullness of the support that they were offering to really reach me. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. So at that time when you felt so alone and you felt like you were an alien living among human beings, basically, who were role models? Did you have anyone you looked up to? Anyone who inspired you?
Really, very, very little. The biggest inspirations for me really were BMXers, were people that rode BMX. And I guess musicians to a certain extent. I was a huge, huge Radiohead fan, and I actually learned how to sing by singing along to Radiohead songs, and I sort of deep dived them as a band. And I was very, very into music and listening to music. And I guess I felt connection to people through music. I felt connection to people experiencing the same things as I was experiencing and being able to connect emotionally with them. And there was some sense of connectedness, although I've obviously had no actual connection with any of these musicians, but it created a sense of emotional connection. And for me, that's really a powerful thing about music, and why I'm so fascinated and involved with it still today. The idea of me being able to create a space for people to connect with their emotion in the same way as I experienced as a child is certainly something that has carried on through in my music. But actual in-person live role models, beyond maybe one specific guy who rode BMX and my art teacher in secondary school, no.
Wow. Who do you think would have been the person you needed back then? If you could describe what was the person you were longing for at that age and who wasn't there for you?
I think somebody who had lived within the worldview and left, who would be able to just hold space enough for me to say, it's going to be okay and you will find a way. And here is how I found a way, rather than me having to walk the path, not knowing how to, and it therefore becoming far more destructive than perhaps it needed to be. But certainly somebody who could understand the strangeness of it all and reassure me would have been incredible.
So take us back with you. Take us to your childhood. First of all, perhaps for our listeners who may not fully understand what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, perhaps you could explain what that faith group believes in, what some of their rituals are, what perhaps some of the things were that were most uncomfortable for you?
Yeah, sure. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, they are a sect. They are a Christian sect. So a cult, but a Christian cult. They were born of the Freemasons in the 1920s in the US. And they, as many religions do, claim that they are the truest form of Christianity, that they went back to the ancient texts and they translated the most true version of the Bible. They call themselves the truth. So you are a person who is in the truth. If you're not in the truth, then you are a worldly person. So my peers at school were worldly and therefore not to be trusted in a way. And in terms of ritual, our week as a child through to my mid-teens, when I stopped going at 15, was Tuesday night would be a Bible study, which would be about 20 people of, well, up to age kind of 80, 90 in some cases, meeting at my parents' home, which meant we had to tidy the house up, get dressed up, and then sit and do a Bible study with this group. It was called The Group on a Tuesday evening. On a Thursday evening, we'd put our suits on again and head out to the Kingdom Hall, which is effectively the Jehovah's Witness church, and spend a 2-hour meeting at the Kingdom Hall. My parents' house was just across the road from a huge playing field and the skate park that I spent a large amount of my childhood on. And very embarrassingly, on a Thursday evening and on a Sunday morning, and often on a Saturday morning, I would drive past my friends whilst wearing a suit. And the next time I saw them, say, "I saw you in your suit. I saw you on your suit." On a Saturday morning, we'd go out and spend an hour or so door knocking, witnessing. So from 8 years old, maybe younger, I was knocking on people's doors and offering them leaflets and magazines and asking them if they'd like a free home Bible study. By the time I was 12, our parents started making us do it in French. And we'd go and find African communities in the local city. And I'd be knocking on doors and asking people if they wanted to become a Jehovah's Witness in French, which was very bizarre. So Saturdays was witnessing. Sunday morning would be back in the Kingdom Hall for another 2-hour meeting. And then possibly in the afternoon, another hour of witnessing. So the weekly schedule, that's kind of what it looks like. The witnesses believe that only a certain amount of people, 144,000 people, go to heaven, and that we on earth, the rest of us, are waiting for Armageddon to happen, at which point there will be a huge test from the devil for 1,000 years. And at the end of that, those that have succeeded will inherit a paradise earth, and they'll live forever without death or disease. And at the same time, everybody who has ever died will be resurrected, and all your loved ones will be returned, which is a fantastic business proposition in terms of recruitment and engagement and emotional involvement, but also bonkers.
What would you say were some of the most harmful beliefs for you personally?
I think that the foundation for me, the interpretation I got from my parents, and I'd say this quite carefully, that this was my interpretation of my family and that surrounded by them, that guilt was a huge motivator, and guilt was the key, really, that we are sinners and we must therefore repent and devote our life to turning other people to join this faith. And that something that really hurt me for a long time was this teaching that if I know that the world is going to end and I don't tell everybody else, their blood is on my hands. And that level of guilt was really heavy.
I mean, as children, we grow up with stories. We grow up with story of Santa Claus, often kind of a story of fear when you think about it. We tell our kids, "Oh, if you're not good, Santa Claus is watching you." Kind of creepy when you think about it. What were some of the stories that I guess instilled guilt and fear and eventually, in your opinion, resulted in pushing you into the direction of self-harm even?
Quite similar to the Santa Claus story, actually. Charlie likes to draw that similarity as well, that you are constantly being watched and constantly being judged. And as a small child, 8, 9, 10 years old, praying to this invisible force whilst also thinking, I don't think this is real. Oh, I'm a bad person for not thinking this is real, was very tricky, and sort of without having any references to understand how different that was to other people's experiences was very difficult.
Do you think I had somebody on, this was a while ago, who used to be a pastor and a youth pastor and then became an atheist, and I asked him a similar question. Do you think that this particular faith can be helpful to people, though? Are there aspects that perhaps you even miss that still sort of trigger some sentimental memories or something?
For me, no. But there are things that I do have to acknowledge that have been benefits in my adult life in terms of the, I guess, general code of conduct and just my ability to connect with people from all backgrounds and ages. And that's something that I'm very grateful for. I kind of am able to connect with people very quickly, and that's basically through my training for witnessing and going and spreading the word. Also, there have been moments in my life where both myself and my cousin and my youngest brother, who have all walked similar paths in sort of stepping away, we found ourselves heavily involved in environmental activism. And we're watching as Extinction Rebellion, this environmental group, popped up, and the rhetoric and the propaganda that they were using as a brand, and how similar that was. And we were joking together about the fact that we'd fallen into another cult in the same way, and actually we're very good at it because we've been trained to operate in those kind of systems. So there is this awareness that and sensitivity, I suppose, to these systems. But in terms of my personal interactions with the religion and my experience of it, there is nothing I miss of it. I guess I have always sought to be a community builder because I understand the value of community because of what I saw other people getting from that community. My middle brother is a prime example. So I have three brothers. I have one who's older than me by 3 years, one who's younger than me by 3 years, and one who is younger than me by 7 years. And my older and my youngest brother, I'm very close with. My middle brother, not so much, although I do have a relationship with him still. He said to me one day, when I was about, I think, 19, 20, he said, I looked at everything that you did in your life, and I did the exact opposite. And I laughed and said I was happy for him, because I am. He is probably high-functioning autistic, although he has never been diagnosed, and very socially awkward. And actually, for him, the system that he's been brought up in serves him greatly. It gives him a social structure. It gives him social cues. It gives him a purpose, a schedule, a way to live his life that actually he really thrives with. And that is a fascinating flip side for me, who was almost the complete opposite. I could not survive in that space at all, and yet he thrives. So it does serve some people.
You kind of said it correctly there with the sense of community, right? Whether it's a religious movement, an environmental group, a friend group, a book club, something as mundane as that, we long for this feeling of community. And I think, for some people, religious movements kind of offer that. I kind of want to go back to that word of community. Now, you mentioned environmental activism. Where do you see your tribe? What is your group of people? If you had to describe like a friend group, what do you think makes your group of friends unique and the right friends for you personally?
What a wonderful question. The community that I found around activism was an interesting one for me to notice. And actually, I left environmental activism to build community, because I realized that if models as predicted do unfold, the most important thing that we will have as a species is community. And therefore, I feel that is the most important thing that we can invest our efforts into building at this time. For me personally, the people that I would like to be surrounded by and seek to be surrounded by are deep thinkers. They are people who want to question the processes and the way that they choose to live. People who really have chosen to be somebody, chosen to bring themselves to the world in a way that empowers them. People who are ethical thinkers, thoughtful people, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I love that. I do believe we have some of those people here at ThoughtVolution. Kind of going back to life as a Jehovah's Witness. Can you tell us how you ended up leaving and what the reaction of your family was?
Yeah, sure. I think this is quite an interesting point, actually. Through meeting and falling in love with this girl, age 13, that relationship was purely based over text message, which is kind of scary. Mobile phones were still pretty new, and I got my hands on one, and I was texting and spending £5 a day on 50 text messages, and would incessantly message this girl, and it's textbook insecure, anxious attachment style kind of stuff, really. This girl was also a witness and raised in a witness family. So I found that connection in that there's this person who understands what it's like, and I'm able to build this kind of secret naughty relationship with them, and that was really exciting. And all the things that I was just describing that I needed, I guess, probably coming back around to answer that question more fully from earlier. I thought I'd found all those things, but I put a huge amount of pressure on this poor young girl, and I basically made up a complete fantasy in terms of what my future would be like. I thought I was going to marry this girl, like, poor girl. And within a matter of months, she quite reasonably ended the relationship, which absolutely spiraled me. I was quite literally heartbroken and I think I was already suffering with depression, but this was a defining moment that really sent me into severe depression and suicidal ideation and self-harm. By sort of 14, I'd really given up. I started to skip school, didn't really get out of bed. I would go to school, but I would leave the house late. I would leave the house with a scarf up over my nose, covering my mouth and my nose, a hat on, and my hood up. So almost like a full burqa. And I wouldn't leave the house unless I was wearing this ensemble. I'd go to school, I'd sit in a corner of one room, and I'd draw and I draw and I draw. And that's all I would do. So I didn't go to any other lessons. And in my home life, my parents were still dragging me to meetings, and I would wear the same, and I would sit in the back room of the church and just wait to go home. And obviously this caused enormous embarrassment to my parents. I was put into therapy. I disengaged with that very quickly, actively sort of removed myself from that process. Over a series of, I guess about 6 months or so, I was getting this repeated messaging from my father that I need to find somewhere else to live. And by 15, I was drinking spirits a lot. My parents don't drink really, and they had a spirits cupboard. So age 14, I discovered that I could actually drink as much liquor as I wanted because they wouldn't notice. So as an insomniac, I would sneak downstairs, have a tumbler full of mixed spirits, and then I'd play the keyboard with the headphones on, or I'd go for long walks, and I'd walk 4-6 miles in the middle of the night by myself, screaming along to Radiohead songs, really spiraling and sort of coming undone. But by the time I was 15, 16, my father was repeatedly telling me I need to find somewhere else to live. He actually started locking me out of the house when I would go out and get drunk with my friends. My older brother was he was driving by then, and he would actually leave his car door unlocked so that I could sleep in his car. And eventually, I guess I got the message. And at 16, I was able to secure some housing through the local authority, which was a situation where I was living with 2 other young teenagers who were suffering with various addictions and had also been kicked out of their family homes. And so I left. The big thing that really shifted how I left the faith of being a witness was that I'd been taught my whole life that there was this big man in the sky watching everything I did, and that to lead a double life, to be saying you're one thing and doing something else, was one of the gravest sins. And so I told the truth. I did exactly as I'd been taught. And I said, this is not the life I want, and this is not who I want to be. I'm leaving. I don't want to do this anymore. And the result was that I was basically blacklisted by the community that had surrounded me my whole life. I'd stood in front of these people aged 8 years old and read passages of the Bible. I'd known these people my whole life, and literally within weeks, I would see them out on the street and they'd turn their head and not speak to me, because I had decided to not live a double life. And that certainly hit home.
You were there alone, basically kicked to the curb by the people you thought were your family, your community, whether you felt you belonged there, but that was their job. They were supposed to be there for you. And you found freedom, whether that freedom was the kind of freedom you longed for at that time, but it was freedom nevertheless. Now, I picture this boy completely alone, nobody to rely on. What did that do to your mental health? being left to your own devices, not having a home anymore, not feeling like you belonged anywhere anymore. What did that do? Like, I mean, alcohol was one aspect of it, I take it, but you mentioned self-harm before, you mentioned suicidal thoughts before, you mentioned depression. Did this newfound freedom help you get out of that, to crawl out and reevaluate the preciousness of your own life? Or did it first hit you even harder to the ground?
Almost both. There was an empowerment in having lifted myself from that situation where my father basically bullied me for, well, what felt like my whole childhood. And there was huge empowerment in I have my own space. I had a door that I could lock that was mine and have a room that I could set out in the way that I wanted. And that was very empowering. But at the same time, this blackness within me was, well, just raging. There wasn't any point. I could see no point in life. And I was just in this constant push-pull of empowerment and joy through things like going out and riding BMX. And BMX, I would say, actually, as a part of my life, I would say that in a way BMX saved my life, because there was a community that was basically made up of outsiders and fringe people. And there were a couple of individuals within like my BMX crew that I did feel like were there for me unconditionally. And although it wouldn't be that they would like necessarily help me, they were there and they were unjudging, and that was really meaningful. And the process of BMX was very empowering in itself. I mean, physical activity and moving and conditioning my body and mind in that way was really positive. But then on the flip side, I'd drink a liter of vodka neat in one session and wake up with my stomach line in chunks on the bedding the next morning. I just kind of rolled along in that way for about a year or so, where I was in some ways very happy and enjoying the freedom, and in other ways just becoming even more destructive. The self-harm levels rose. I was a cutter. I was a scratcher, really. And I continued to do that. It's sort of like, there's a secret hobby almost, that I almost needed to feel this pain behind closed doors, while between the parties where I would always be that guy that was blackout drunk and trying to make out with people and getting locked in the bathroom for hours at a time because I was too drunk to open the lock. I was that guy, and I would drink alone in really quite scary quantities regularly. At one point at 16, when I was moved into this council run house, they made me see a police woman who put me on a list as an alcoholic, as a young alcoholic. They said to me at that time that if I was put in a room and left for 3 days, and they also put a heroin addict in a room and left them for 3 days and didn't give either of us anything, at the end of the 3 days, the heroin addict would be fine and I would be dead because of the physical level of alcohol that I was putting into my system and the addiction that had caused. So this real push-pull of like trying to live and trying to find joy at the same time as quite literally destroying myself in various ways, which ultimately led to, I talked earlier about having that BMX person, that one person in my life that he was a lot older than me, and he was a pro. He was a sponsored BMXer. He took me on a trip when I was 17 years old, and he brought me to Cornwall, which is the very southwest tip of the island of the UK, of England. And I went on this road trip with him for a week where he drove me around and met all these amazing people. Some of them were pros that I'd like seen in magazines, and I just rode BMX and saw this incredibly beautiful part of the world. It's actually where I live now, bizarrely enough. It's sort of funny I ended up here. And I just had this week where I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then I went back to my crappy life. I moved into another house, which was it was a much more serious in terms of the levels of addiction and the types of addiction and the people that were there. And the area that it was in was much more run down. And I came crashing down. I sort of moved into this place. There were methadone bottles under the bed from the last addict that was there. I started drinking huge amounts of whiskey. And at that point, I decided it was time to go. I decided that after having had this incredible experience and coming back to the reality of my life was too much. So I started to actively say goodbye to the people that I cared about. I would set up meetings with them age 17 and say that this is it. I'm going to go, and I want you to know that I really appreciate you, and grateful for you in my life, but I've chosen now that this is enough for me, and I'm gonna get off the ride, as it were. So that's what I did.
This was the time when you had decided to end it all?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I reached out to the people that I cared about. I met with them. I said, I've done now, and it's time for me to go. One of those people happened to be the girl who'd broken my heart those years ago when I was 13. I'd had a sort of on-off relationship with them a couple of times over the next few years, where we kind of bump heads and cross paths, because I basically thought that was still the thing that was going to save me. So at 17, I made this decision that I was going to kill myself. I went to see her and told her that I was going to kill myself and wanted to say goodbye. And I left the house. About a quarter of an hour later, I got a phone call from her father screaming at me down the phone saying, "Get back here, come back here now." And I headed back there, and he accused me of raping her because he'd come into this house and found his daughter curled up on the floor crying. And I honestly have no idea how that is the conclusion that they came to. And I was actually quite shocked and disappointed that that could be their estimation of me. But I returned, and he basically wanted to keep me there. He'd obviously called my father, and my father arrived and shoved me into a car and drove me to a hospital. And at the hospital, he dragged me out and said that they need to lock me up. And after a conversation with a doctor, the hospital, they gave me two options. They said, look, you can go into a young adult mental health ward, and you can go in there for 6 months if you are committed effectively. If we force you to go, then it'll be a minimum of 6 months. And if you go of your own accord, it could be shorter. And as I had committed to killing myself, it seemed logical to say, yes, I will go of my own accord. And so I then went off to a young adult mental health ward in a nearby city. And there was a turning point in itself there, really. I was very committed to getting out and getting the job done, if you like, and finishing my life and ending it. But in there, I had some realizations as I was surrounded by people with what I felt were far more serious mental conditions than I was experiencing. When you're sat enjoying the free food that you're being given, I'd come from kind of poverty effectively, and suddenly I was in this situation where meals came and they didn't cost anything, and I could eat as much as I want. But I was surrounded by these young women who were really struggling with eating disorders and were crying their eyes out as they were forced to eat one biscuit and one cookie. And that really, really hit home for me in terms of my own experience and the difference in terms of mental illness of what I was experiencing versus that kind of a challenge. I also read the book Yes Man by Danny Boyle, which was given to me by somebody who I met in there. And it's a story, if people aren't aware of the story, there's a good film with Jim Carrey in it, which depicts the book in a quite comedic way. But the book itself is quite comedic and based on real life experience, where a man decided to say yes to absolutely every question that was asked of him for a year. And the results were chaotic, but incredible in a way. And I think something landed in that book with me and inspired me. But I was very stubborn and very committed to killing myself. So I was in for 3 months, I think, total. And then I left. And my best friend at the time, his mother, asked if I wanted to go and live with her and him and her family. And I did that. I went straight back to drinking and throwing myself into silly situations and just getting blackout drunk and repeating the cycle. But I didn't kill myself. And then at 18, I started a relationship with somebody who'd been a close friend for several years. And that really shifted things for me. And that really was the defining moment where I had a conversation with myself internally. I sort of got a meaningful somebody. And I actually asked myself, what would happen if you tried? Why don't you give it a go? And so I said to myself, okay, I'll try at 18. I'll try living and see what happens. Within weeks, I realized that, I was told quite clearly that her family thought I was a waster. I was living on benefits at the time, so I didn't earn any of my own money. I really was just freeloading at that point and having a lovely time destroying myself. So within a few weeks, I got myself a job. I found a job at a garden centre and realized very quickly that turning up at work hungover made work almost impossible. So I actually decided to stop drinking and gave up drinking completely, which was a massive thing and came with its own physical withdrawal. But I did it because I was trying. I then went to college and studied horticulture and really, really fell in love with learning for the first time. I think that empowered opportunity to choose. I'd been working in this garden centre and realised that I was selling these plants I knew nothing about, and I liked being outdoors and being in nature. That was part of riding my bike. So I decided to go to college and started learning, and I got a real thirst for learning, and I was super fit. I was happy for the first time in my life. I was happy. I was sober, in a relationship. I was in a band. I was riding bikes a lot. I was flying along, as it were, and trying was paying off.
If that Josh that decided, okay, I'm going to try to do this life thing, I'm going to try living for a little bit, if that very Josh had the opportunity to meet suicidal Josh, what do you think he would tell him?
That's a tricky one. So much happened in such a short space of time. I believe that person would have said, hang on, you've got this.
And if you could talk to that boy right now?
If I could talk to that boy, I would hold them and I would say, you are not going to believe me, but this life is going to be incredible. And you cannot see just how good it will be and how good it can be, but I need you to believe me. You must stick this out and you must see this through, because everything is waiting on the other side of it.
You mentioned earlier that there was a time when you were going to therapy, but it really wasn't for you. Obviously, therapy can be very helpful. Do you think you just didn't have the right therapist? Do you think it just wasn't the right time, the right approach? What kind of intervention do you think you could have benefited from?
Honestly, I don't think anything would have worked. I didn't want anything to work, and therefore it did not. And I think that really is the power of personal power and choice. I was started on CBT. I was put into cognitive behavioral therapy. I was started on Prozac, fluoxetine. I didn't want these things to work, and they put me through, I think, 3 different talking therapies, and they put me through several antidepressants, several insomnia, sleeping pill type drugs of varying strengths. And I was quite determined that they would not work, so they did not work. I saw therapy as kind of a game, really, where honestly, I was quite an intelligent young person, and I knew the answers they were looking for, and I would tell them the answers they were looking for. But I remember, I have a clear memory of one of the therapists who said, I don't understand. You have all these people around you trying to, like this. They said, imagine you're in a hole, you're stuck in this hole, and you have all these people around you trying to throw ropes to you, and you just have to take one of the ropes and they will pull you out. And I sat there and I thought, that's rubbish. That's not true. I have to throw the rope myself. And until that happens, nothing will change. And so nothing did change because I didn't want it to change, because I did not want to throw the rope. So that's very different to an experience where somebody says, I want to engage with therapy, or I want to use an antidepressant as a tool to help me move through this phase. And at which point I would never discourage anybody from engaging with therapy, but it's about choice and it's about wanting to engage. And I did not want to engage, and so I didn't.
I very much agree with that. I think you have to have the willpower. It's kind of like, when somebody says, oh, you should really stop smoking. My parents have smoked, I don't know. I mean, as long as I've been alive, pretty much. And they have phases where they say, oh, we're going to quit. And then they don't. And I think, any success story you hear from somebody who does quit smoking or quit drinking or quit drugs, that spark always comes from within. And I agree with you there. And it's a very unfortunate thing, because if people don't have that spark within, or they don't discover that spark within, we're losing them. I mean, but it has to come from within. I do believe that therapy can point you in the right direction, but you have to have the will to change your life. And sadly, there are many people out there who haven't found that spark, or maybe they don't feel worthy of life. You do a lot of work now where you try to help people. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good time to talk about it, because exactly as you're saying, my realization was that you cannot help people who do not want to help themselves. And that's incredibly frustrating as a person that cares about people, and as anybody, and all those people in my life who were those people for me that were desperately holding the light and wishing me well and wishing for me to engage and to change things, and were unable to because I had made the decision not to allow it. My work now, I work as a coach with adults in relationship and in communication. I work as a youth worker and a mentor, really, with young people, mostly teenagers. And understanding that I cannot change people, all I can change is myself, and that I cannot help people who do not want to be helped. In a way, there is an empowerment to that for me, in that what I can do is hold myself to a higher standard in terms of how I choose to live my life and how I choose to interact with people, and offer my story, offer this story, offer hope and hopefully inspiration, and help walk people through their own darkness to find what sparks them. I just flick back a little bit. There was a memory I had very clearly of being, I think when I was 13 or 14, I went and sat outside my family's house in an alleyway. We had a little alleyway that went around the side of the house. And it was one of these times where I just felt I did not belong there. It was not my home. It was almost not my family. And I went and sat outside, cross-legged in the dark, and was alone. And I was feeling in my chest, there was this, I imagine this flame, and it was just flickering, and it was so tiny and almost non-existent. And I could feel that it was almost blown out. And that if that candle was blown out within me, that would be it. I would die. I would be exhumed. And my youngest brother walked out of the house with a candle, lit candle, and placed it in front of me, said nothing, and walked away. He was about 7 years old, and it stuck with me because I'd been thinking about this metaphor of the candle, and then here was this candle, and I stared at it, and I imagined this flame within me, and it is a metaphor that stuck with me throughout the following years and through life and today, as these flames rage inside me, these kind of flames of life and vibrancy. And having that experience and knowing that it can be so dark, it can be so dark that the flame appears gone, but that if you can just find a little flicker, and if someone else can bring that flicker and just say, hey, what about this thing that you care about, or like what's this thing mean to you, and let's do more of that. Let's zoom in on that thing and just see what happens with that little flame. And my work really is about inspiring people to find their flame and to add fuel to the fire.
How does your inner flame shift now that you've chosen life? Would you say that depression, hurt, and pain are completely behind you? Or does that flame sometimes still go out nowadays?
For a long time, I have been filled with the zest for life. I'd said earlier that I fell in love with learning, and I really did. I saw the world through new eyes. And obviously there's another that sort of diminishes it, but there's a blip along the way, but really intensified the flame for me and pushed me into living vibrantly and living fully now, today, building an incredible life, future, and relationships. And I have done that. I have, honestly, in my opinion, far exceeded my expectations of what success could look like for me as a human. But today, it's interesting to be here with you now, because today, over the past 6 months or so, in my professional life as a coach, I realized that there is physical trauma within me that I needed to address, having disengaged with therapy all those years ago and kind of existed purely on this lust for life and zest for it, that now I'm in a settled position and I'm serving other people and aiming to inspire. I realized that there are some things that needed to be addressed in a therapeutic setting. So I engaged with therapy in the middle of last year, and I engaged with a therapist who was highly recommended. And this kind of speaks to your earlier question again about the right person at the right time. It was the right time, but it was the wrong person. And I fully tried to engage with this therapy and the mode of therapy, but this person and I didn't gel, and I found that it damaged me in a way that I wasn't anticipating. And I started to get very physically ill in the back end of last year. And actually, that's continued. I've been through these cycles in the last 6 months where I'm working hard, I'm serving people, I'm giving good energy to the world. And internally, my body and my mind are trying to reconnect because they know they must, but they don't know how. And they don't know how to release that trauma until recently, where thanks to some close friends, I've been able to find a new therapist, and I'm currently in the process of engaging with EMDR therapy. And I have to say, things are shifting, things are moving at quite a rapid rate. But the difference, again, is that it's chosen. I've chosen to engage with this. I've chosen to take my life to the next level by letting go, by opening up and being vulnerable to understanding that to go forwards, it's time to go backwards.
Obviously, a lot of people in your early years caused you great hurt. How has your journey influenced your perspective on the concept of forgiveness, both towards others and yourself?
Another great question. There was a lot of anger in me for a long time. Certainly through those teenage years, I would say up until probably 21, with everything that had happened, there was a huge capacity for anger, and for me to sit in the energy of anger and injustice and to blame and to point fingers. But I always knew in my heart that I had played my part within all of that scenario. And certainly for a long time, there was a level of self-hatred, disgust almost in the way that I conducted myself, because I hurt people. They hurt me, other people hurt me, but I hurt people as well. I hurt people in ways that I'm not proud of now, and that given the opportunity, I would apologize for today. Forgiveness is a fascinating thing because it is as much for ourselves as it is for the other people. And certainly my parents is a prime example. I had this sort of epiphany when I was in my very early 20s, where I realized that my parents were just people. They were just people doing the best they could do with the resources they had and the belief system that they had available to at the time. And that really flipped things for me, and been able to say, okay, well, I totally disagree with the way they did it. I totally disagree with the belief system and what that does to people and to children especially, but I get it. And I can let that go now. I don't need to hate. I don't need to hold that within me anymore. And the beautiful freedom that comes with that is that I let it go within me, and I feel better for it. And I think that a lot of forgiveness is actually, it's about respect. It's about finding respect and building respect within ourselves again, by saying, I understand this, I can hold this and still love myself and let this go.
That kind of already touches on my next question, really. As someone who values thoughtfulness and ethics, how do you handle situations where, to this day, you encounter individuals whose values conflict with your own on a very essential level?
Yeah, that is something that I experience quite a lot. It sounds flippant, but it doesn't bother me. Other people's beliefs are theirs to choose for themselves. It sounds really flippant, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. It's not my responsibility. And I think this is where the line gets blurry with Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, is that they are actively trying to put their beliefs upon people. And I draw the line there. So me as an individual, I'm a human that practices nonviolence. I'm a human that wants to do a better job of being a cis hetero white male in the privileged West of the world. I'm a human that seeks to tread lightly on the planet and wants to do what they can to support nature, which includes my diet. I'm a vegan. I've been a vegan since 2015, and that was a big life choice for me. And there's a lot of judgment that comes with that from close friends. That I get a lot of stick for it even now from people that I like. But it doesn't bother me because it's my choice. This is my life that I have chosen to live. Very physically, I have said, I am going to live. And from that day forwards, I have asked myself, how do I want to live? Who do I want to be? How do I want to interact with others? How do I want to do things with excellence and in a way that makes me feel proud of who I am and who I am and how I be, I guess. So it's not about other people's opinions or their judgments. It's about my opinion of me and my judgment of me. And we come back round again to respect and self-respect. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it actually gives us a good segue into my next question about, you mentioned choosing life and this intentional choice and everything that came with it, but that life was almost snuffed out a second time when you had a near-death experience that almost cost you that newfound life again. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I talked about how I was at college and in this relationship, which was going great, and life really was flying. I was fit as a fiddle, a 19-year-old young man. I was cycling miles and miles to work and working hard, studying hard, playing hard, really living. I was sober. Age 19, I went to a gig. I was very into heavy metal at that point, and part of the sort of heavy metal scene locally. Went to see a heavy metal band at a local pub. It was the middle of summer. It was just around the solstice, so very long summer days, a really great time to be alive. And I was house sitting for a friend who I worked with, a work colleague, that is several miles away. And I'd been to this gig and I was going to nip back to my house, pick up my helmet and my lights. This is on my bike, so I rode to the gig without them. I was going to go and pick them up and then cycle off to go and house sit at this house. So this is about 11 o'clock at night, and it's just a few days after the longest day. So there's still light in the sky. I am stone cold sober leaving this gig, and I pick my bike up from a side road. I take it out to the main road, a main road that I had crossed probably hundreds of times in my life on the way to and from my cousin's house. And I looked up and down the road. I've been cycling since I was 3. There's no lights. There's no cars. I put my foot in the stirrup on the pedal on the right-hand side of the mountain bike that I was riding, pushed into the road, looked down for my left pedal, and then everything went blank. And I don't remember anything. But 3.5 days later, I woke up in an intensive care unit bed and was told that I'd been hit by a car from the side as like a blunt trauma from the side that had broken my leg. It had misaligned my pelvis. It had broken several ribs. And I put my head unprotected through the windscreen of this car, which had then skidded to a stop and flung my body further down the road. And I had staggered around in a fight or flight mode, running on full adrenaline, but I don't remember a thing of this. And had managed to call my brother, who I was living with at the time, and say, I've been hit by a car, I'm coming home. And then tried to start walking home, was then held down by some people who were passing by and had come out from the pub when they heard the bang of the car hitting me, and they held me down while the ambulance arrived. My brother arrived at the scene and I got quite violent, apparently, as the nurses in the ambulance tried to induce a man-made coma to help me more safely enter a coma as the bleed on my brain was spreading. I ripped the pipes that they put in my throat out of my throat, and in the process completely ripped my vocal cords in two. I then fell into a coma after having had an epileptic fit in response to the drugs that they tried to put into me. And they whisked me off to hospital. They put a bolt in my brain. I was hooked up to 19 machines at one point in the intensive care ward. And they told my family that I would either wake up with no memories, no power of speech, nothing really, and just be a shell of a human, that I'd be like a vegetable, and that my body would stay alive with life support for around a year, and then it would probably give out. That, or I would die, and I would not wake from the coma. And 3.5 days later, lo and behold, I woke up, looked around and thought, crap, what's happened? I was alive.
How did you surviving this third chance, differ from the second chance you had just granted yourself a little bit before that incident happened?
Initially, there was confusion, there was anger, there was injustice. This was not fair. I'd worked so hard and I was doing so well. Like, why this? Why now? And I definitely teetered on the edge of letting myself let go again and put myself back in the hole and just give up, because this was almost too big to take on. But part of me also thought, well, I wanted to die for so long. I tried to die for so long. And I had the opportunity. I was gifted the perfect chance to die. And yet something in me wanted to live. And I couldn't ignore that. Physically couldn't ignore that. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why it was, but I listened, and that really ignited a new level of desire to live life fully within me.
That's beautiful. Intentionally choosing to live and understanding that you have that hunger for life and that had been buried within you all along. It's beautiful. I kind of want to circle back a little bit to your relationship. How do you navigate the balance between vulnerability and self-protection in your relationship with Charlie, with your friends, as somebody who has experienced a lot of letdown, a lot of false hope?
This is an interesting question because it changes with who I am interacting with. So I'm a person whose number one core value in life is honesty. I committed to that age 15 when I said, you've told me there is this man in the sky and that they're always watching, and I'm choosing honesty, and I have always chosen honesty. And really, it's the times when I haven't chosen honesty that I probably most regret, because that's when I've caused the most hurt. I realized in my early 20s that it's the only way to live with ourselves in a respectful way is to live a life of complete authenticity and honesty. The risk with that, as you say, like as somebody who has experienced so much trauma, is that if I was completely honest with my peers, my friends who I go and ride mountain bikes with all of the time, I'd probably scare people. And something that I have learned to do, maybe a little too well, is to be able to talk about my trauma and talk about highly traumatic experiences in a way that hopefully isn't too scary for the people listening. But I am actually a huge introvert. I am a massive introvert. And with most people, unless they ask, I'm not going to stick my story out on them. I don't feel that it's something that I have the right to do. Our situation right now is quite beautiful for me because you are asking me, and I am an open book, and I love to be honest. So now I get the opportunity to share it, and I hope that people listening to this can come to this through their choice and say, I want to listen, and be open to that, and hopefully find value and inspiration and hope within that. But for the most part, in my day-to-day life and my day-to-day relationships, unless I feel there is value in sharing my story or a part of my story, just some little snippet of my experience, unless there is a call for that or that it has been requested, I keep it generally to myself. And if I do share it, I quite often will package it within humor. And I do this little nervous laugh at the end of speaking about things to help put people at ease. And I didn't really notice I did that for a long time until another friend who's also experienced a lot of trauma pointed it out and said, I think you have a really beautiful way of sharing your story in a way that makes it accessible for people. And that's something that I was quite proud to get that feedback. With Charlie, our relationship was built on gritty authenticity from the beginning. There was some complication to how we got together, and that there was kind of a little rumor mill that began around that in the area that we were living, and a lot of untruth. So we really had to be very honest with each other and chose to be so authentic with each other from the word go. Literally, the day that we decided we would explore a relationship, we spent a whole night talking about who we were, who we wanted to be, who we had been, who we cheated on, why we cheated on them, everything, absolutely everything. And that had not happened in my relationships in the past, and it had certainly not happened in Charlie's relationships in the past. But we both knew that to get different results, we probably needed to do different things. So we started from that place, and we haven't stopped. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and complete transparency. So as I now go through this journey of my own with therapy, I can share that process with Charlie and know that she is in my corner to listen. Obviously, I'm not going to share Charlie's inner workings and her experiences, but needless to say, she's experienced a lot of challenge herself, mostly through grief and family losses over the past few years. And she's been able to share that with me really transparently. And it's a privilege for me. It is a privilege with anybody when I am able to be authentic and they are able to be authentic with me.
Beautiful. She became your rock, and you, the guy who you thought originally wasn't even worth living this life, became the rock for somebody else. Just think about that. You know, it's a beautiful thing, and especially when two people find each other who kind of share that experience of having to crawl through the mud for so long just to figure out that there's a lake where they can wash all of that mud off of them and just have a fresh start. It's a beautiful image. As somebody who gave up on life at some point, what are your hopes and aspirations for your future now, both personally and professionally?
So personally, I am very committed to this therapeutic journey that I have started, and I'm excited about that. I'm really, really excited about what that will unlock for me on a personal level in terms of levels of self-love, of self-respect, and the enhanced capacity that I know that will bring in being able to offer more love, more joy, more hope, more vibrancy to the world and to the people that I interact with within it. I love being a light for people in this world. And my career revolves around that. So the two are intertwined, really. I've seen over and over in my life that the more successful I am, the more successful the lives of those around me become. That might sound egotistical, but I really believe that the more I do the work on me, the more I am able to hold space and to help to build other people up, and the more they are able to achieve. And that for me is incredibly inspiring for me as a motivation, not just to get the goals. I'm not a money oriented person. I'm not a money motivated person, really. I'm a community motivated person. I'm a connection motivated person, and I'm a living life vibrantly motivated person. I want that to come through in my personal life. I want to live fully. I want to live vibrantly, and I want to help others to find ways that are right for them to do the same, because this life is incredible. The chances of us being here are so slim, and the opportunities that we experience, certainly here in the West, just incredible.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have one last question, and that is, of course, how can people get in touch with you? If somebody would like to hear more about you, learn more about your story, how can they get in touch?
So I use Facebook a lot. I am Josh Rogers on Facebook. I am also That Listening Guy on Facebook, which is my coaching moniker. That is my name across most platforms. So I'm on Instagram as That Listening Guy. I'm on TikTok as That Listening Guy. Facebook is my primary hangout. So if you want to connect with me more personally, that's probably a place to go. Yeah, that's me.
Then one final question. What is a thing that you as a coach just learned very recently?
Ooh, very recently. As a coach, I think this, I almost spoke to this a minute ago, but it is certainly a truth that has hit home, is that my clients are only able to get the results that I am able to get. And that has been a sobering but inspiring realization, because that drives me to reach new heights in my life so that others can too.
And are there limitations to where you believe you can go with your clients?
No, there are, the limitations are those that we put on ourselves. I have this learned experience that I've practiced over and over again in my life, where I set a goal, and something we've not talked about is I lived in a motorhome for several years, and it was an 18-month goal to get to that stage. to build this life. I had a very linear approach to it. I was like, I'm going to do these things over this amount of months and have this much money and get this kind of van. And none of those things happened. It was all wiggly. And where I ended up was somewhere so much better and more beautiful and unbelievable than I ever could have imagined when I set the goal previously. And I realized that, and it's something I've replicated several times since, is that if you set goals and you commit to them and you accept and trust and have faith in the wiggly process of getting there, you'll probably end up somewhere much better than you'd anticipated in the first place. And that is why I say that now I don't really see a limit on where I can get my clients, because as I continue that process within my own life and my own life becomes increasingly unbelievable, which it does consistently. And I've seen in my own clients, when they are freed from, often I work a lot with people pleasers. And when they are freed of that shackle and start living their life on their terms for their goals, they fly. And really in surprising ways that I, as a coach, couldn't have foreseen. And I don't think they could have foreseen either. But that is one of my greatest joys to observe.
Thank you so very much, Josh. This has been a wonderful conversation.
It really, really has. Thank you for your thoughtful listening, your thoughtful questions, and for offering me a space to really share my story. Thank you.
As we draw near the close of this profoundly moving episode of ThoughtVolution, I find myself deeply moved by the courage and vulnerability that Josh has shared with us today. From the depths of despair to the heights of hope, Josh's journey serves as a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is a flicker of light waiting to guide us home. And that flicker of light lives within us. We just have to learn and tap into it. Now, in the face of unimaginable challenges, Josh's determination to choose life has not only transformed his own path, but has also become a ray of hope for others who may find themselves struggling in the shadows. His honesty, wisdom, and kindness resonate deeply, offering solace and inspiration to those who may be navigating similar paths. As we bid farewell to Josh, I want to take a moment to remind our listeners, every single one of you, my dear ThoughtVolutionists, that help is always available for anyone who may be facing their own struggles. You are not alone, and there is hope. Reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or mental health professional, and if you don't know where to find help, please reach out to us. I would love to help any way I can. Your story is far from being over, and you are worthy of love and support. In closing, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Josh for his courage in sharing his story with such openness and vulnerability. His strength is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience and growth, and his words will echo in the hearts of many of our ThoughtVolutionists long after this episode concludes. Now, to you, my friends, thank you for joining us on this journey of self-discovery, empathy, and transformation. Remember, no matter where you are on your own path, you are valued, and your story matters more than you could ever know. This is ThoughtVolution, where every story is a testament to the power of human spirit to rise, to heal, and to evolve. Until we meet again, may you find comfort in the knowledge that you are never alone and that hope is always within reach. Farewell for now, my dear ThoughtVolutionists, and remember, please, even in the darkest of nights, the dawn is always waiting to break through. I love you, Latsies.